As the mother of a 14-year-old boy who has been mugged locally 3 times last year, once at knife point, what is the panel going to do about it?
Gosh, Lena, can you just tell us a bit more about that? So you're local to this area,
Yeah.
are you?
He was 13 when he was first mugged on the High Street, which is the A10, which is a big main road. He was
so just outside this building?
Yeah, and once in Clissold Park at 3:30 on a Sunday afternoon in broad daylight. And but he is part of a generation of children growing up in these parts who, for them, it's just something that happens. Kate here, her son was mugged just before Christmas. It's just like, you know, this is just, it's an epidemic. And there's been no sort of resolution in terms of arresting people or
not in any of those instances?
No.
And what about you, Kate? You're sitting next. Has there been anyone arrested for your son?
No, nothing at all, no. No, the case was closed after one day.
Wow. Well, that must have been terrifying for the boys and also for you as parents.
Yeah.
I mean, Trevor, do you want to kick us off on this?
I should first say that, full disclosure, I was born 10 minutes from here, and I grew up in this area. I lived up the road. Everybody in this room will know where Wood Green is, in a postcode which is N226SX. The typical number of sexual and violent crimes in a London postcode is 26. In the postcode where I grew up, it is 226 last year. 226. So this is not it's not across the city, but where it is incredibly serious. And I completely feel for you. There are 3 young people, mostly young men, dying in this city every week from knife crimes. There are 2 women who die from domestic violence every week, and we have rightly ploughed enormous attention and resources into that. We are not yet doing the same thing for these young people. And I think we need to be clear what we're talking about when we're talking about knife crime. This is not some accidental thing. What is happening here is young people are being hunted down by packs of other people. They are being stabbed. And aside from the ones who are dying, there are hundreds in this city who are being stabbed. And forgive me for being absolutely blunt about this. There is now a thing that they do. They stab kids in the anus so they have to wear colostomy bags. This is vicious. It's a war and it's out of control. And we and the authorities seem not to be too interested except to say, let's have an argument about, are there more police, are there more cuts? Actually, everybody who knows about this knows that these kids are doing this in a way that you'd have to have North Korean levels of policing to catch them at it. So I think we've got to do some different things. First of all, we've got to understand what's happening here. And the first thing is who's doing the killing and who's doing the dying. And let me be absolutely frank. It is young black men who are dying. And by the way, young black men who are doing the killing. So we need to focus on those communities and those areas and not pretend that this is something which is just abstract. Secondly, we need to help some of the communities where the young people have come straight from war zones. In this area, I think everybody here will know what I'm talking about. We throw them into schools.
Well, for people who don't live in here, the audience watching at home.
London is a very mixed community, it's vibrant, all the rest of it, and we receive, rightly, people from terrible backgrounds, trauma, children who have seen their relatives killed in front of them. And what do? We put them straight into schools. We don't help them. We don't give them therapy. That's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to spend, first of all, locate the problem properly. Secondly, we need to spend as much as we can to help these young people find a way through. I mean, I could talk about this all night, and I know I haven't got the time. I feel so passionately about this, I'm sorry. I could go on about it. But let's take this seriously, and let's not turn this, let me preempt, into an argument about who's going to spend more and more police. That is not going to be the answer. The answer here is recognize who is killing, who is dying, and help those people, not some general policy.
Well, just to add to what Trevor is saying, so we have knife offences at the moment are at the highest level ever recorded. And then today, in terms of offences recorded that then result in a suspect being charged or summoned, that's at a record low, around just 7% of offences. So, Mike, obviously I'm going to come to you now as an ex-Chief Constable of Durham, and you've got personal experience of trying to deal with this. What's your view? What did you do in Durham to try and have an effect?
I'll come to that if I may, Fiona. First of all, Lena and Kate, dreadful that you've had to go through this, and particularly your children. And after the show, if you want to see me, then I'm sure you're being looked after. But I can certainly just make sure that I'm sure the Metropolitan Police and the victim support are doing their best. But I would just, if you want, I can just cast an eye over that for you. This is my fault. This is the fault of the police. Because for 39 years now, I've done your bidding. I've done it rather well, actually. I'm rather proud of myself. I've locked up a lot of drug dealers. And when I've locked them up, I've put them in the court and they've gone to prison for a long time. But 2 hours after I've locked them up, behind my back, 2 more violent drug dealers have tried to take over the patch, and the most violent one has won. So then I go after the most violent drug dealer that's taken over from the previous one. And this is a Darwinian spiral of violence. Then we're quite sneaky as cops. We employ undercover cops and we employ double agents. And the drug dealers worked out that we don't employ people who are 13 and 14. So that's who they recruit to do their bidding. The people who deliver all the drugs that's wanted in London are principally under 17. And we've created that. We've created that because we've done your bidding. We are never going to arrest, I agree with Trevor, we are never going to arrest our way out of this problem. Of course the police have got a role to play. Of course we've got to investigate crime. And of course it's vital that the attacks on Lena and Kate's children are investigated to the fullest extent. But the cuts since 2010 have had an impact. There's got to be a grown-up debate about drugs. 39 years ago, when I joined policing, most of the heroin in this country came from Afghanistan. It still does. We've got the same number of police officers, but 100 times more heroin coming from Afghanistan. So, what's the answer? Well, the answer is got to be youth and social provision. We've got to prevent this. We've got to get upstream. And sadly, the cuts to policing are a mere shadow of the cuts to local authority budgets over the last 10 years.
Yes, the woman here.
Yeah, it's concerning what the 2 ladies said over there. 3 years ago, I was mobbed while in labour on my way to Homerton. Until today.
To the hospital?
Yeah, just down there in Stamford Hill. Until today, I haven't had any arrests and the case is closed. And another thing, where I live now in 7 Kings, just behind my window, 3 men fought and killed themselves. I watch everything and nobody asks if I'm feeling okay, the psychological effect of the past one.
These were the killings that happened last week?
This Sunday, just behind my window. And no one has asked, how are you faring? Are you okay? Apart from my family who has been doing my school runs for me. So I just want to know, isn't it right for the government to set out some organization that can give advice and, you know, any way to help the victims?
And how are you faring?
So.
Teresa, when you heard the woman there speak so powerfully, and also you heard what Mike had to say in terms of policing numbers to a certain extent, but nonetheless it's made an impact. And also, but as nothing, Mike was saying, relative to the cuts to local authority budgets. And then we've had a Conservative government for the last 10 years.
Well, this current situation is intolerable. The upsurge in knife crime has to be dealt with, and we are determined to do that.
And do you feel in part responsible when you hear someone like Mike talk about cuts to local authority budgets?
I believe that we need to recruit 20,000 more police. We're committed to doing that. We need a strong policing response. We've strengthened stop and search powers, which are crucial. We're giving police the tasers they have requested, and we also fully recognise that we need to invest more in the programmes to prevent young people from getting involved in gangs and crime in the first place. And so we've got £700 million worth of programmes planned now for exactly that. We need a dual approach, a tough policing response to bring the perpetrators to justice, but also a really comprehensive route to try and ensure that young people do not get involved in this kind of cycle of violence in the first place, and to promote that public health approach which has worked so well in Glasgow and many cities in the United States.
But is this not just making up for the cuts that you've already made?
No, it's not. I mean, if you look at the last time this upsurge in violent crime on the streets of London happened, that was in around 2008. And actually, Boris, as Mayor of London, brought the murder rate down by 50%.
And it went down across the country, not just in London.
It is possible to do this, and we are determined to do this because we have to keep the young people on the streets of this city and others safe.
There's a lot of hands up, so I'm going to, Trevor, if you give me, I'm just going to get around the audience a little bit. Yes.
I just want to follow through with what Trevor said about the people who are killing are within the black community. The people who are dying are within the black community. So does it mean then that because it's a problem belonging to a particular section of our society, that our government either does not understand the need or has become desensitized about this population, this group of our population, who, for some reason, it may all result from a vicious cycle of deprivation that no one cares to look into? I don't know that policing is the answer to it. I don't know that the political argument about investment is the right answer to this problem. We need to look further than this.
I'm going to let you come back to that. Yes, the woman with the blonde hair here and the scarf.
I think you're absolutely right. This problem began way before cuts to the Met. It began with the complete abolition of youth services in all the areas. We've just seen local services for youth just stripped out of communities, and young men have nowhere to go, they have nowhere to turn, they have no support. And where do they turn? They turn to each other. They become each other's families. The cornerstones to young people becoming successful adults are self-esteem, confidence, self-worth. And the places where they were getting that were youth services. Without that, this is where the problem began.
None at the back.
I think these issues are driven by people's consumptions. I think London is the cocaine capital of Europe, and I'm sure we've all been to parties, I have, where it's like visibly on show and people have no qualms about using it. And these people who join these gangs, they see it because there's money in drug dealing. And so maybe the government needs to look at its drug policies as well, and maybe there's kind of an option in a decriminalisation model like they have in Portugal, or something that might actually solve it from the demand side.
I have to say, not parties I go to, but maybe I'm guessing the wrong people. Yes, the man here in the grey sweater.
Yeah, thank you. Trevor, I do agree with you, what you said about it's not just police numbers, but I don't think you can underestimate the Conservative government's cuts to the police numbers, because the extra 20,000 police officers that Boris Johnson is going to recruit will only just begin to bring the levels back to where they were. But it's such a significant thing, the police number cuts, and it has to be taken into consideration the part that has played in knife crime.
Emily.
I mean, I think you're right. I think that we're not just talking about cuts to police numbers, we're also talking about the community support officers who used to be the eyes and ears, who used to run the boxing clubs in my area, who used to actually have a connection with the community and be able to, because communities cannot be policed. Policing isn't something which is done to a community. It can only be done with the agreement of the community, and you must work with the community. My heart goes out to you two. I'm a local mother as well. All 3 of my kids have been mugged. They've all had their bicycles stolen. It's terrifying. One of the perpetrators was taken to court because my daughter actually ran out and got a police car flagged it down and got the police to arrest the person. But it's terrifying, and it is something that we live with day to day, living in the inner city. And there are levels. So there are these sort of street muggings that go on, and then there is the drug dealers and the drug gangs. And as a local member of Parliament, I have been to so many mothers' houses, not just actually black mothers, but mothers from all different types, from all different communities, you know, because the gangs actually are very multiracial. And I've been to see, and I go and knock on the door, and I give the mum a letter, and I say, if you ever need me, I'm here. And sometimes they ask me in immediately, and sometimes they don't. It takes years, and I continue to have families that I continue to look after, because nobody ever gets over this. And not only is the life of the young person who's murdered ruined, and all of their family, but so is the stupid, terrible young man who has stabbed someone and who in turn, if they get caught, goes to prison and the family's lives are wrecked. We know what the solution is. We have to have more police officers, we have to have more community police officers, but we also have to have more youth services. My borough next door has had 70% cuts from government to its central grant. Hackney has had the same. And what happens when you cut back a local authority that much? They only do what the law says they have to do. And because the law doesn't say they have to provide youth services, because they have to provide social care and the other things which they must do, looking after kids in care and that sort of thing, they cut back on youth services. They don't want to, but they have to. And then, as somebody else said, what do these youngsters do? And actually, when a child gets to 11, 12, 13, 14, they want to find a role model outside the family because it's part of growing up. And if there isn't a sports teacher, or there isn't a youth worker, or there isn't a teacher who has the time for them, they will find role models amongst their own age group, and this is how gangs develop. So.
Well, I don't directly disagree with anything that people have said on this panel and indeed in the audience, and I particularly appreciate the point about, middle-class drug takers who are sort of, happy to take the cocaine and not worry about who's supplying it. At the same time as well, as the mother of a 19-year-old, I can tell you I was very relieved when he got to the age of 19 because I felt he was so vulnerable in a neighbourhood like this, not very far from here, when he was sort of 14, 15 and so on. And I'm glad he's sort of finally getting to manhood. But in my area where there have been several deaths, unquestionably, it's not just a case of more police, but more visible police on the streets. I hope that's what Boris Johnson means by an extra 20,000. I'd like to see a lot more. At one stage, the police came and sat in our area where local youths congregated. They were there night after night for about a month. And that finally disrupted the gangs, and they haven't properly returned. It's still a bit scary, but they haven't properly returned 2-3 years on. And that's the importance of having cops that really care about those communities and are determined to just be there until they have done something about the problem. Now, I've also had experience recently of a poor kid dying on the street near me. And there was sort of crime scene ticker tape, and I went up to the local policeman and I said, what's happened? And he acted like I was, a nobody who had a real nerve to ask what was going on in my own community. So I really do expect police to be polite to the people who live in the area, to discuss problems with people who live there. I mean, for all they know, I could have been a witness, I could have seen someone run away, I could have seen someone put a knife in the bin, but they acted like they didn't want to hear from me. And I think a lot of us feel like you could increase police numbers, but what are the police actually doing? Are they out there helping us? They have done in the past. I have benefited from that, but not always. I'd love to see more of that active, Bobby's on the beat, whatever, just active policing so that you can go and call somebody and say, hey, what's going on?
Well, Trevor, I know you want to come back in, but Mike, I know you're trying to get a word in here.
If only you'd been the Chief Constable in Durham, we would have got 5 outstandings, not 4, because you're spot on. What we need here is that, and if one of my police officers had been as rude to you as that, then I should have been jolly unimpressed. Policing is just dead straightforward, folks. We've got to be approachable, we've got to be kind, we've got to be ruthless when it's appropriate, but you've got to know who we are. If you don't know our names, how can we possibly police with you? Yeah. When Robert Peel set up the police, he said, the police are the public and the public are the police. Yeah. We are not an army of occupation. Yeah. And sadly, if police officers feel beleaguered, and I've seen this in the past, then sometimes you do get those dysfunctional relationships. You've got to have neighbourhood police officers, hopefully in a local neighbourhood police station, and you know their names, and they are on patrol with PCSOs. Those police officers and PCSOs have got to have a spring in the step. Yeah. One of the things that inspectors always said when they came to Durham was, gosh, it feels different here. And you've got to engender that feeling that you can do something. Let's not be fatalistic about it. And this is the final point. You asked me what we did, Fiona. We arrest people. We absolutely arrest people, but we don't necessarily prosecute. Now, if somebody's been stabbed, then clearly that goes to court. But what I'm talking about are the precursor offences, the precursor behaviour. We all know now about adverse child experiences. So we're now, in Durham, there's something called a mini-police. Every junior school now has its own mini-police force. And we make sure that the most disadvantaged kids are part of that with a police uniform. They learn about social cohesion. And it isn't twee, it's hard-hitting, but it has a major impact. Those children have got those social values, those civic values for the rest of their lives.
Trevor, briefly.
Look, I'm going to push back on a couple of things. I don't want drugs in my city. I would like to have more police officers. But we're talking about a specific thing. 3 young men will die before this programme is broadcast again. And we know what they look like, we know what part of the city they come from. And we also know that it isn't about something that's happening externally. Talk to these kids and they will tell you about beef. They will tell you about the absolute insane reasons these things happen, which are outside the ken of people on this panel and people in the audience. We need to understand what they are doing and why they're doing. And the reason I feel passionate about it, if I had a son, he'd be well off, but I bet you he'd stand a good chance of being involved in this kind of thing too. There are 2 practical things I think we could do. First of all, I would like to see somebody stop glorifying the culture and the music and all of that does drill, guns, kill, 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 and by the way, disrespects women. And we make heroes of the people who make this music. I need to be blunt about that. And that's one of the reasons that young people are into it. And the second thing I think we could do, we can have more police, but that's going to take time. If you go across the road from here, there's a park, Clissold Park. My mum pushed me around it as a baby. Nobody will walk across that park tonight because it's too dangerous. One of the reasons that we have public spaces now which used to be the province of janitors and park keepers, and schools would have teaching assistants that would walk with people. Over in Hackney, that's one of the things that Mossbourne Academy, successful school, did. Maybe one of the things you could do is invest in bringing back some of those intermediate professions. Not the big deal, but people who are just there. Because these things happen in places where nobody is watching. So the more we can have those park keepers back, those janitors, the people who are around, the more likely we are to protect our kids. Right. Do the simple thing first.
I'm going to move on a minute because there are a lot of questions, but before I just want to come back to you, Lena. What do you think about what you've heard?
I just wanted to say that I probably know about 30 people who've been mugged in Clissold Park through this community network that I'm part of. And I think I've seen 2 policemen once patrolling, and we are communicating with the authorities through this network that I'm part of, and we tell them, we actively encourage people to report, but you never see, apart from once, any police there. Right. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is that there's been a sort of evidence that says the increase in exclusion from school is tied to the increase in street crime. Yeah. And so, yet we are excluding more and more and more, and our schools are becoming stricter and stricter and stricter. And, you know, it just seems like that is a question for the Tory government currently.